If you've ever poured your soul into something only to watch someone else hang it on their wall and call it their own masterpiece, then you know exactly where my story begins. But before I tell you how I went from being the ghost in the machine to the one who owned the entire factory, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps me know I'm not just screaming into the void, and that these stories of quiet battles and earned victories are finding the people who need to hear them most. My name is Simone, and this is how I learned that the greatest power isn't in being seen, but in controlling what people see. It started, as these things often do, with a celebration that felt like a funeral. The air in the conference room at Hope's Landing was thick with the smell of cheap sparkling cider and the self-congratulatory musk of my director, Murphy. He stood at the front of the room, beaming under the flickering fluorescent lights, a newly minted glass plaque in his hand. It was for the Pioneer Grant, a $2 million award from the Sterling Foundation. It was the largest grant in our small nonprofit's history. It was the grant that would change everything, and it was the grant that I had written, word by painful word, from scratch. For 5 years, I was the unseen engine of Hope's Landing, while Murphy was the face, charming, eloquent, a master of the donor circuit handshake. I was the architect. I sat in a cramped, windowless office and spun words into gold. I crafted narratives that made spreadsheets sing and turned desperate community needs into compelling, fundable stories. I secured millions, one meticulously researched proposal at a time. Murphy, in our private one-on-ones, would always praise my quiet dedication. He loved that phrase. It was his way of saying he appreciated my work as long as it never asked for a spotlight. Quiet. That's what I was supposed to be. Every time I'd broached the subject of a raise, or even a title that reflected my actual contribution, something more than grant coordinators, he would lean back in his leather chair, a picture of paternal disappointment. He'd say things like, "Simone, we're a family here. We're in this for the mission, not the accolades." Or my personal favorite, "Your value is understood. It doesn't need to be advertised." He made my desire for fair compensation feel like a betrayal of the cause. The Pioneer Grant was different. It wasn't just another proposal, it was my magnum opus. It was based on a radical new framework I had developed for assessing and articulating community impact. It took me 6 months of late nights, fueled by stale coffee and a burning belief that I was on to something revolutionary. I bypassed the standard, stale methods. I built it from the ground up, with data models and narrative structures that were entirely my own. When the acceptance email came through, my heart nearly beat out of my chest. $2 million. It was a number that felt like a dream. Murphy had forwarded the email to me with a single line, "Great work, quiet dedication pays off." Now, standing in that conference room, he held the plaque aloft. He spoke for 20 minutes about his vision, about the tireless hours he spent conceptualizing the program, about how he personally steered this ship into new waters. My name was never mentioned, not once. I stood in the back, near the wilting vegetable platter, and felt myself becoming transparent. I watched my colleagues clap, their faces turned toward him like sunflowers to the sun. A few of them, the ones who knew, shot me sympathetic glances, but they were fleeting. No one wants to stand in the shadow when the sun is shining so brightly on someone else. The meeting ended. As people were milling about, Murphy made his way over to me, his smile as wide and empty as a canyon. He clapped me on the shoulder. He said, "A rising tide lifts all boats, Simone. We all benefit from this." Then, he slipped a small, stiff envelope into my hand. "A little something for your hard work." I didn't open it there. I waited until I was back in the hollow silence of my tiny office. I slit the envelope open with my thumb. Inside was a generic thank you card with a stock photo of a mountain range. Tucked inside that was a single crisp $100 bill, a token, a tip. For a $2 million victory, my cut was $100. It wasn't just an insult, it was an erasure. He hadn't just taken credit for my work. He had put a price tag on my invisibility, $100. I looked at the bill. I looked at the 5 binders on my shelf, each one representing a year of my life, a year of my quiet, dedicated work. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened. It cooled into something sharp and clear. The quiet was over. I picked up my bag, left the card and the money on the desk, walked out of my office, and didn't look back. I resigned the next morning via an email that was as short and cold as the feeling in my gut. I was done being a ghost. It was time to haunt. The first 24 hours after I quit were a vacuum. The rage that had propelled me to write that 2-sentence resignation email, "I hereby resign my position, effective immediately," had burned out, leaving behind a cold, hollow dread. I spent the day in my small, meticulously clean apartment, a space that suddenly felt like a pressure chamber. Every corner held a memory of work. The worn spot on the rug where I'd paced, brainstorming a narrative for a housing grant. The bookshelf crammed with binders of old proposals, their spines a timeline of my own slow erasure. The coffee mug, a cheap promotional item from a conference Murphy had attended, and I had written the talking points for, sat on the counter, mocking me. I sat on my sofa, the city noise a distant hum, and I let the weight of the last 5 years crash down. It wasn't just the Pioneer Grant. That was just the final, crushing blow. It was a death by 1,000 paper cuts, a slow erosion of self-respect I had allowed, rationalized, and endured for the sake of a mission I genuinely believed in. Or at least I used to. My mind spooled backwards, unbidden. I remembered my first day at Hope's Landing. I was 28, brimming with a naive, ferocious optimism. I'd come from the for-profit world, tired of writing marketing copy that sold things nobody needed. I wanted my words to build something, to mean something. Murphy, in my interview, was the embodiment of that hope. He had this incredible way of speaking about the community, of painting a picture of change that was so vivid you could almost touch it. He spoke of mentorship, of building a team of passionate people. He told me, "Here, your talent won't just be used, it will be nurtured." I believed him. My first year was a blur of learning and small victories. I mastered the language of nonprofit finance, the intricate dance of grant reporting. I brought in a $50,000 grant for a youth literacy program. Murphy was ecstatic. He took me to lunch and told me I had a gift. He called me his secret weapon. I glowed with pride. The term felt like a compliment then, not a cage. The first crack appeared about 18 months in. I had single-handedly secured a $250,000 grant that saved our after-school program from budget cuts. It was a complex, competitive process, and I had beaten out dozens of larger organizations. It was a huge win. A few days after the news broke, I scheduled a meeting with Murphy. I had prepared a short presentation outlining my contributions over the past year and a half. I was going to ask for a title change to grant managers and a modest 10% raise. I was terrified but determined. I walked into his office. He let me get about 3 minutes into my pitch before he held up a hand, his expression one of patient weariness. "Simone," he said, his voice soft, "I admire your ambition, I really do, but we're not a corporation. We're a family. We don't get caught up in titles and hierarchies here." He gestured around his office, at the pictures of him with local politicians and smiling children. "This work is its own reward. The fulfillment we get from helping people, that's our bonus." He made me feel cheap, like I was asking for something dirty. He reframed my request for professional recognition as a moral failing. I left his office feeling ashamed and foolish, my prepared notes clutched in my hand. That was the first time I let him shrink me. Then there was Lena. Lena was the first person at Hope's Landing who saw me. Not the quiet functionary, but the actual person holding the place together. She'd arrived 2 years ago, a bright-eyed, fiercely intelligent program coordinator, fresh out of her master's program. She was everything I had been, but with a sharper sense of justice. She was assigned to manage the very after-school program I had saved with that grant. I remember one frantic Thursday afternoon. Lena appeared at my office door, her face pale with panic. "Simone, can I talk to you for a second?" she whispered, clutching a stack of papers. She explained that Murphy had been responsible for submitting a critical quarterly progress report for one of our biggest funders. The deadline was tomorrow, and he had completely forgotten. He was out of the office at a luncheon, his phone off. A missed report meant a potential funding freeze. It would be catastrophic. Lena was near tears. I don't know what to do, she said. All the data is in these raw spreadsheets. It would take days to sort and analyze. I looked at the chaotic mess of numbers she held. I took a deep breath. Okay, I said, my voice much calmer than I felt. Give them to me. Go get us 2 coffees. The strong stuff from the cafe down the street. We can fix this. For the next 6 hours we worked. I showed her the system I had secretly built for myself, a series of macros and templates that could ingest raw data and translate it into the specific reporting format our top funders required. It wasn't just about putting numbers in boxes. It was about shaping the data to tell a story of progress, to preemptively answer the questions a skeptical program officer would ask. It was a part of a larger methodology I was slowly, secretly building. Murphy didn't know it existed. He just knew that whenever he needed a report, a polished, perfect PDF would magically appear in his inbox. As we worked, Lena watched me, her initial panic turning into a kind of awe. She wasn't just watching me work. She was watching my system work. How did you build this? She asked, pointing to a data visualization I generated. This isn't in any of our shared drives. It's just a little something I put together to make things easier, I'd said, downplaying it out of habit. Easier, she'd replied, shaking her head. Simone, this is genius. This is the whole engine room of this place, isn't it? It's you. We submitted the report with 2 hours to spare. The next day, Murphy came back, completely oblivious. He saw the confirmation email and just nodded. Good, handled, he'd said, before launching into a story about the city councilman he'd impressed at lunch. He never asked how it got done. He just assumed it did. Lena caught my eye across the office, her look a mixture of disbelief and solidarity. That was the day our alliance was forged. That was the day I realized I wasn't just being overlooked, I was being exploited. That incident was a turning point. It was then that I started to formalize my private work. What Lena had called the engine room, I started calling the community resonance framework. It wasn't just a collection of templates anymore. It became a philosophy, a documented process. I spent my weekends and evenings building it out, not on the company server, but on my personal laptop, in encrypted files. I created training manuals for myself, diagrams, process flows. It had 3 core stages: empathy mapping, where I used community interviews and local data to move beyond simple demographics and understand the emotional and psychological needs of the people we served. Then came data narrative weaving, the part Lena had seen, where I braided hard statistics with compelling human stories to create a proposal that appealed to both the heart and the head of a grant reviewer. The final stage was the impact projection model, a proprietary way of forecasting and visualizing the long-term ripple effect outcomes of a potential investment, making the grant feel like a can't-miss opportunity. I was building a fortress, brick by brick, without even knowing why. I think a part of me knew this day would come. I was building an escape hatch. It wasn't a conscious plan for revenge. It was more primal than that. It was about survival. It was about creating something that was so intrinsically mine that no one, not even Murphy, could ever claim he had built it. The Pioneer Grant was the first time I had deployed the fully realized framework, from start to finish. Its success was the ultimate proof of concept, and my reward was $100 bill. Back in my silent apartment, the memories solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I thought of my father, a carpenter who always told me, measure twice, cut once. He taught me the value of preparation. He also taught me that you never build your house on someone else's land without a contract. I had spent 5 years building a mansion on Murphy's land with nothing but his verbal praise as a lease. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled down a plain black binder. It wasn't a grant proposal. It was the complete documentation for the community resonance framework, my life's work, my intellectual property. I opened my personal laptop, the matte black one Murphy had once joked was my secret diary. He had no idea how right he was. As I stared at the screen, a notification popped up, an email. The subject line was just my name, Simone. It was from Lena. I clicked it open. The message was short, but it was a lightning bolt to my soul. I saw what he did in the meeting. I saw the envelope. He's a monster. You built that grant. You built this place. We all know it. I hope you're okay. Tears. I didn't know I was holding back, pricked at the corners of my eyes. It wasn't pity I felt, but a profound sense of validation. We all know it. It was the first crack of light in a very dark room. Her words were the spark. My meticulously documented framework was the kindling. The $100 insult was the gasoline. The fire was about to start. I deleted the draft of the long emotional resignation letter I had been composing in my head. A letter full of accusations and justifications. It was pointless. He wouldn't get it. I opened a new email. To Murphy, CC, the entire board of directors. Subject, resignation. The body of the email was 2 sentences. This email confirms my resignation from the position of grant coordinator, effective immediately. I wish Hope's Landing all the best in its future endeavors. I hovered my mouse over the send button. This wasn't just quitting a job. It was detonating a bridge. It was stepping off a cliff without knowing if the parachute I had been secretly sewing for years would actually open. But in that moment, I knew that falling was better than staying. Staying meant slowly suffocating. Falling meant I might learn to fly. I clicked send. The quiet that followed was different. It wasn't the quiet of dread. It was the quiet of a chessboard after a decisive, game-changing move. The quiet of a plan, finally in motion. Walking away from Hope's Landing wasn't a single act of defiance, but the final step in a long subconscious journey of self-preservation. It felt like my secret plan was only just now revealing itself to me. For years I had been building a lifeboat, piece by piece, while telling myself I was just decorating my cabin on a ship I believed would sail forever. Now, standing on the shore, watching it shrink in the distance, I could finally see the lifeboat for what it was, a vessel built of foresight and quiet rebellion. My primary asset, the heart of my entire strategy, was the community resonance framework. It was more than a methodology, it was my intellectual armor. In the weeks after I quit, I didn't look for jobs. I didn't frantically update my resume. I retreated into my apartment and became an archivist of my own work. I spent 12 hours a day refining the documentation, transforming my rough notes and diagrams into a polished, professional presentation. I designed a logo for it, a simple, elegant icon of sound waves emanating from a heart. I gave each module a crisp, corporate-sounding name. Empathy mapping became the stakeholder insight matrix. Data narrative weaving became the quantitative storytelling engine. It wasn't about revenge. It was about translation. I was translating my nonprofit soul into a language that the world of high-stakes philanthropy and investment would understand. This act of codifying my work was deeply therapeutic. With every slide I created, I was reclaiming a piece of myself that I had allowed Murphy to obscure. He had seen my work as a service, a faucet he could turn on whenever he needed a grant. I was now bottling the water, proving it came from a unique spring, and writing the patent for the formula. My alliance with Lena became my lifeline to the world I had just left. She was my insider, my periscope. We never spoke on the phone. It was all encrypted chat messages, a new habit we'd picked up. Her reports from inside Hope's Landing were both grimly satisfying and deeply concerning. The place was floundering. Murphy had tried to take over the grant writing process himself, armed with my old files, but he was like someone who had been given the keys to a Formula One car, but only knew how to drive a golf cart. He had the finished products, the past proposals, but he had no understanding of the engine that created them. He couldn't replicate the process because he never knew it existed. A major reporting deadline for the grant that had saved the after-school program, the one Lena and I had salvaged, was approaching again. Murphy, according to Lena, had spent a week trying to assemble the data. He'd snapped at her when she offered to help, saying he had it under control. The result, she told me, was a mess. A jumble of numbers without context, without the narrative thread that gave them meaning. He submitted it anyway, a document full of bluster and impressive sounding but hollow jargon. The foundation sent it back within a day, with a list of pointed questions he couldn't answer. The panic was setting in. The ship was taking on water, and the captain was busy polishing the brass. While this was unfolding, I was fortifying my own position. I thought back to a conversation I'd had almost a year prior. It was with a program officer from a small, family-run foundation in a neighboring state. Her name was Maria. We were on the phone discussing a minor grant I had written. At the end of the call, she paused and said something that had stuck with me. "You know, your proposals are different, Simone. They have a distinct architecture. It's not just the usual boilerplate. There's a logic to them, a real methodology. Whoever is writing these for you is brilliant. I write them myself," I had said, a little surprised. "Well then," she'd replied, "you should put your name on them." At the time, I'd dismissed it as a simple compliment. Now I saw it as market research. My work had a signature, a brand. Even when my name wasn't on it, it was recognizable. It proved my framework was not just a process, but a product with a unique identity. This memory was a critical piece of my newfound confidence. It was external validation from an expert, untainted by Murphy's political games. That memory, combined with Lena's updates, pushed me to take the most important step of my secret plan. I called a lawyer friend of mine, the kind of sharp, cynical guy who usually handled messy corporate divorces. I had actually consulted him a year ago, after a particularly galling incident, where Murphy had presented my annual report to the board as his own, literally reading my words from a printout without once acknowledging the author. My friend Mark had listened patiently and then given me some prescient advice. "He's never going to give you credit, Simone," Mark had said. "People like that don't share the spotlight. They just absorb it. You're not an employee to him, you're an asset, like the office furniture. So you need to make sure you own the asset." On his advice, I had taken two crucial steps. First, I had bundled the core diagrams, process descriptions, and training manuals for the community resonance framework, and filed for a copyright. Mark had admitted it was a gray area. You can't copyright a general idea, but you can copyright the specific, detailed expression of that idea. My meticulous documentation, the very thing I was now polishing, was my fortress wall. It was a debatable legal shield, a plausible inaccuracy in the grand scheme of intellectual property law, but it was a shield nonetheless. A cease and desist letter, based on a registered copyright, even a debatable one, was a weapon most small nonprofits like Hope's Landing couldn't afford to fight. Second, and more importantly, I had registered a sole proprietorship. It cost me $200 and an afternoon of paperwork. I called it Resonance Strategies, LLC. It had no office, no employees, no revenue. It was a ghost company, a legal vessel, waiting for a cargo. The copyright for the framework was registered, not to Simone Valenti, the person, but to Resonance Strategies, the entity. These were the contingency plans I had set in motion long ago, driven by a gut feeling I couldn't ignore. It wasn't a plan for revenge. It was a plan for independence. It was me building my own house, on my own land, long before I knew I was going to be evicted. My days settled into a new rhythm. In the morning, I worked on the framework pitch deck, turning my life's work into a compelling business proposal. In the afternoon, I would get a brief, coded message from Lena about the slow-motion chaos at the office. In the evenings, I read books on business strategy, on intellectual property, on organizational psychology. I was no longer just a grant writer. I was a student of power, learning the language of the world I was about to enter. One evening, my phone rang, an unknown number with a Manhattan area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "May I speak with Simone Valenti?" a woman's voice asked. It was crisp, professional, and held an unmistakable air of authority. "This is she," I said, my heart starting a low, steady drumbeat against my ribs. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance," the voice continued. "I am the executive director of the Sterling Foundation. I'm calling you because my team and I have been deeply impressed with a recent proposal we funded, the Pioneer Grant. It was submitted by an organization called Hope's Landing. I said nothing, my knuckles white on the phone. The proposal was, to be frank, one of the most intelligently structured and compellingly argued cases for funding we have seen in years, she went on. It has a unique architecture. Our analytics team was fascinated by it. They said it was less like a standard proposal and more like a blueprint for scalable impact. When we were conducting our post-award due diligence, we made some inquiries. The name of the signatory was a Mr. Murphy, but we were discreetly informed by a member of the board that the architect behind the work was in fact you. We were also informed that you recently resigned. I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. The CC on my resignation email. It wasn't a parting shot, it was a flare. A board member, tired of Murphy's act, had pointed the way. Dr. Vance paused, and then delivered the line that changed everything. Simone, we at the Sterling Foundation don't like to invest in projects. We like to invest in systems. And it seems to us that you haven't just written a great grant. You've built a great system. I'm not calling to offer you a job. I'm calling to schedule a conversation. We'd like to know more about the engine that built that proposal. And we'd like to discuss what it would take to bring that engine here. The silent, steady work began to pay off, not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a powerful machine finally being switched on. The weeks after that first call from Dr. Eleanor Vance were a blur of calculated preparation. My quiet apartment transformed into a war room. The conversation she had proposed was, I knew, the most important interview of my life. It wasn't a test of my ability to do a job. It was a test of my ability to articulate the value of my own creation. I flew to New York. The Sterling Foundation's offices were the antithesis of Hope's Landing. Instead of cramped cubicles and flickering lights, there were soaring glass walls, minimalist art, and a quiet, purposeful energy. It was a place that didn't just have money, it had gravity. I was shown into a large, airy conference room overlooking Central Park. Dr. Vance was already there, along with 2 other senior executives. She was exactly as her voice had suggested, sharp, elegant, with an intensity that was intimidating but also invigorating. There was no small talk. After a brief introduction, she gestured to the large screen at the end of the table. Simone, she began, we're here because of this. She clicked a button, and the cover page of my Pioneer Grant proposal appeared on the screen. Our interest, however, is not in the specifics of this project. It's in the methodology behind it, the architecture. Tell us about that. This was the moment. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady when I spoke. I had rehearsed this, not the words, but the confidence. I opened my laptop and connected it to their system. The logo for Resonance Strategies, LLC, filled the screen, the sound wave emanating from the heart. What you saw in that proposal, I began, is the output of a system I call the Community Resonance Framework. It's a methodology designed to bridge the gap between grassroots needs and institutional funding by treating community narrative as a core strategic asset. For the next hour, I didn't just present, I taught. I walked them through the 3 pillars of my framework. I showed them the stakeholder insight matrix, explaining how it moves beyond demographics to map the emotional and logistical ecosystem of a community. I demonstrated the quantitative storytelling engine, using anonymized data to show how I could braid statistics and personal stories into an undeniable case for support. I finished with the impact projection model, revealing the diagrams I had copyrighted, showing how I could forecast the second and third order effects of a successful program, turning a grant from a donation into a high-yield social investment. I didn't mention Murphy. I didn't mention Hope's Landing beyond using the Pioneer Grant as a case study. I didn't frame it as the work of an aggrieved employee. I framed it as the proprietary, licensable intellectual property of Resonance Strategies. It wasn't a sob story. It was a business pitch. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Dr. Vance looked at her colleagues, then back at me. A slow smile spread across her face. So you didn't just write the music, she said. You built the orchestra. I built the conservatory, I replied, my voice quiet but firm. The orchestra is the next step. Meanwhile, back at Hope's Landing, the engine had seized. Lena's messages were becoming more urgent. Murphy, in his panic over the rejected report, had made a fatal error. He tried to call the program officer at the funding foundation to smooth things over. According to Lena, who overheard the call from her cubicle, it was a disaster. He was condescending, then defensive, then tried to blame the transition of a junior staff member for the shoddy work. He didn't use my name, but the implication was clear. The program officer, a woman who had worked with me for years and respected my precision, was not amused. She apparently cut him off and stated that the report was not just late, it was substandard, and that unless a corrected and complete version was submitted within 48 hours, she would be forced to recommend a formal review of their funding. The chaos at Hope's Landing was the perfect, dark backdrop to the bright, clear opportunity unfolding in front of me. The contrast was everything. One organization was falling apart because they had devalued their core asset. The other was offering to build a national platform around it. A week after my presentation, Dr. Vance called me again. The quiet authority was still there, but it was now tinged with excitement. "Simone," she said, "the board has approved our proposal. We don't want to hire you as a grant writer. We want to partner with your company, my ghost company, Resonance Strategies, LLC, my $200 investment." The offer was staggering. The Sterling Foundation wanted to acquire an exclusive license to the Community Resonance Framework. They would fund the creation of a new division within the foundation, the Center for Program Innovation. I would be its first director. I would have a team, a substantial budget, and a mandate to train nonprofits across the country, using my framework as the core curriculum. My salary was more than triple what I had made at Hope's Landing. My name, Simone Valenti, would be on the door, and the name of my methodology, the Community Resonance Framework, would be on the national stage. My expertise wasn't just being acknowledged, it was being institutionalized. I had gone from being a service that could be bought for $100 bonus to an asset they were willing to invest millions in. But there was one more move to make. My move. During the negotiation of the final contract with my lawyer Mark and the Sterling team, I insisted on a small clause. It appeared innocuous, a standard part of the new center's rollout plan. The clause stated that the pilot program for the center's training curriculum would involve a cohort of 10 nonprofits, selected for their potential for high-impact growth. The first invitation, it stipulated, must be extended to Hope's Landing. The Sterling lawyers saw it as a nice gesture, a nod to my history. Mark saw it for what it was, a checkmate, because the invitation came with a condition, another clause buried in the program's governance charter. All participating organizations would have to undergo a rigorous capacity and leadership assessment conducted by the center's director, me, to ensure they were capable of implementing the framework. The silent takeover was nearly complete. The foundation, my foundation now, would knock on Murphy's door. But I wouldn't be there asking for my job back. I would be there as an auditor, holding the keys to his future. The power hadn't just shifted. The entire board had been flipped. The call from Murphy came 3 weeks after I accepted the Sterling Foundation's offer. The news of my new position had just been announced in a major philanthropy journal. I was sitting in my apartment, which now felt less like a cage and more like a launch pad, sketching out the curriculum for the first training cohort. My phone buzzed, displaying his name. I let it ring twice before answering, my voice intentionally placid. "Simone, I saw the news. Congratulations, that's fantastic." His voice was a thick syrup of false enthusiasm. The old, patronizing charm was back. It was brittle now, stretched thin over a palpable layer of panic. The Sterling Foundation. "Wow, you always were a great networker." I just said thank you, Murphy. There was a beat of awkward silence. He had expected more, perhaps gratitude or a shared reminiscence. I gave him nothing. The silence was my new weapon. "Listen," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more conspiratorial. "Now that you're on the inside there, we should talk. Hope's Landing and Sterling have a great relationship, obviously. We need to make sure we keep that going." I was thinking. I cut him off. not rudely, but with the cool precision of a surgeon. I'm sure we'll be in touch through official channels, Murphy. The syrup curdled. Official channels? Simone, it's me. We were a team for 5 years. Yes, we were, I said. And in that moment, the perfect line, unrehearsed and brutally honest, came to me. You were the face of the team. I was the engine, and the engine has left the building. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line before I said, I have to go now. Goodbye, and ended the call. I felt no triumph, no malice, just a profound, quiet sense of closure. The power shift was complete. A week later, the official letter from the Sterling Foundation arrived at Hope's Landing. It was an invitation to join the inaugural cohort of the Center for Program Innovation. It was positioned as a prestigious honor, a recognition of their work on the Pioneer Grant. Lena told me Murphy paraded the letter around the office like a trophy, a sign that he still had the magic touch. He was blind to the Trojan horse that had just been wheeled through his gates. His acceptance was swift and enthusiastic. He saw it as a free stamp of approval from the biggest name in the business. He had no idea he had just voluntarily signed up for his own performance review. The day of the capacity and leadership assessment was surreal. I walked into the conference room at Hope's Landing, the same room where I had been publicly erased just a few months before. This time, I wasn't standing in the back by the vegetable platter. I was sitting at the head of the table. Beside me was Dr. Vance, who had insisted on attending the first assessment personally. Across from us sat Murphy. He looked smaller in his own office. The bravado was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. He kept adjusting his tie. Thank you for your time, Mr. Murphy, Dr. Vance began, her voice echoing with professional courtesy. As you know, our goal here is to ensure our partner organizations have the internal capacity to leverage the advanced methodologies of our program. My Director of Program Innovation, Miss Valenti, will lead the assessment. She said my name with emphasis, and I saw a flicker of something in Murphy's eyes, a dawning horror. He was realizing this wasn't a celebration, it was an audit. I began calmly, my questions taken directly from the core principles of my framework. Mr. Murphy, I started, could you walk us through your methodology for pre-proposal needs assessment, specifically your process for integrating qualitative community feedback with quantitative demographic data? He blinked. He started to talk, but it was just a cloud of buzzwords. Synergy, stakeholder engagement, holistic approach. He had no substance, no process. He was a man describing the taste of a meal he had only ever seen in a picture. I moved on. Let's talk about narrative construction. When you're faced with complex impact metrics, how do you weave those into a compelling story without losing the data's integrity? What's your model for that? He stammered. He tried to pivot, talking about the importance of passion and vision. Dr. Vance just took notes, her face impassive. I continued, question after question, each one a quiet, surgical strike at the heart of his incompetence. I was dismantling him with my own vocabulary, a language he had never bothered to learn. As a final step, we interviewed a junior staff member to assess ground-level operations. We had requested to speak with the lead on the after-school program. Lena walked in. She sat down, poised and professional. I asked her the same questions I had asked Murphy. Her answers were brilliant. She was clear, concise, and specific. She talked about the challenges of data collection, the importance of consistent follow-up, the way she used personal anecdotes from the children in the program to illustrate the statistical outcomes. She was, without knowing it, explaining the fundamental principles of my framework, the parts I had taught her during that one frantic afternoon. She was demonstrating the very capacity Murphy so glaringly lacked. She was the proof that the engine had been real, and that he had no idea how it worked. The final report to the Hope's Landing Board of Directors was written by Dr. Vance, but the words were mine. It was a masterpiece of professional damnation. It praised the organization's past successes, attributing them directly to a highly sophisticated and proprietary grant-writing methodology that had been personally developed and executed by a former employee. It then stated, in cold, unequivocal terms, that current leadership has demonstrated a fundamental lack of understanding of these core operational systems, and that without a significant change in leadership and strategic capacity, future funding from the Sterling Foundation, and likely from other major donors, would be at significant risk. We didn't recommend he be fired. We didn't have to. We simply laid out the facts. His incompetence was a liability the board could no longer afford. It wasn't about revenge. It was a risk assessment. 2 weeks later, an email from Lena appeared in my inbox. The subject was simple. It's done. Murphy had been asked to resign by the board. He was gone. In the same meeting, they had offered her the position of interim executive director. She was terrified. She wrote, but she had accepted. Her last line was, "Thank you. You taught me how to build." The power hadn't just shifted. It had been passed on. It had been transferred to someone who deserved it. The vindication wasn't in his fall. It was in her rise. My final confrontation with Murphy was not in a boardroom, but in a coffee shop near my old apartment. He had requested the meeting, a last, desperate attempt to understand what had happened. I agreed, mostly out of a clinical curiosity. He looked tired and diminished. The expensive suit hung on him differently now, a costume he no longer had the role to play. He tried to be angry, then nostalgic, then pleading. He talked about loyalty, about the family we were supposed to be. He just didn't get it. He saw my move to Sterling as a betrayal, a personal attack. He couldn't comprehend that it was simply a consequence of his own actions. "I don't understand, Simone," he said finally, his voice raspy. "I always praised you. I told you how valuable you were." I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth a small comfort. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of sad clarity. I decided to give him the truth, not for his sake, but for mine. "You praised my quiet dedication, Murphy," I said, my voice even. "You didn't praise my work. You praised my silence. You thought my value was in my being invisible. You were wrong. My value was in the work, and the work is no longer here." I stood up, leaving my half-full cup on the table. "I wish you the best," I said, the corporate platitude now tasting like irony on my tongue. I walked away, leaving him sitting there alone, a king dethroned, finally forced to look at the empty space where his most valuable asset used to be. The new reality began to set in. My new office at the Sterling Foundation was on the 34th floor, with a window that spanned the entire wall, offering a breathtaking view of the city. It was a landscape of possibilities. On my desk next to my state-of-the-art computer was a framed blueprint, the architectural plan for the National Training Center we were building around the Community Resonance Framework. My name was in the title block, Director Simone Valenti. The first training cohort was a milestone. We had selected 10 promising nonprofits from across the country. As a special courtesy, I had personally invited Lena to attend, representing Hope's Landing. Seeing her in the front row on the first day was a moment of profound circular victory. She was no longer a panicked junior coordinator. She was a leader, eager to learn, ready to build her organization on a foundation of competence and respect, not bluster. My life was no longer quiet. It was filled with the noise of construction, of collaboration, of passionate people arguing about ideas. It was the good kind of noise, but I kept a piece of the old quiet with me. On a small, unobtrusive shelf behind my desk, inside a simple silver frame, sat a single crisp $100 bill. It wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder of the price he thought I was worth, a reminder of the cost of invisibility, a price I would never ever pay again. It wasn't about the money, it was about the valuation, and I had finally set my own. So if you are out there, feeling like a ghost in your own career, if you are building masterpieces in the dark, while someone else takes the applause in the light, I want you to hear me. Your story is not over. For 5 years I was a ghost in someone else's machine. I was praised for my quiet dedication because my silence was profitable for them. The moment I was betrayed, the moment they put a price tag on my invisibility, was the moment I realized my mistake. I had been waiting for them to recognize my value. But your value is not a line item on someone else's budget. It's not something that's given to you in a performance review or a token bonus. It is the sum total of your expertise, your integrity, your late nights, your secret insights. It is your intellectual property, and it belongs to you. My story in the end wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about taking the work I had done in the shadows and building my own house in the sun. Sometimes the systems we are loyal to are fundamentally broken. They are not designed to reward competence. They are designed to preserve a power structure. And when you realize that, you have two choices. You can keep patching the crumbling walls of a house that will never be yours, or you can take your blueprints and your tools and go build your own foundation. Don't wait for them to see you. Make your work so undeniably powerful, so uniquely yours, that they are forced to reckon with your absence. Build your own engine. Document your process. Copyright your genius. Know your worth so completely that when an opportunity arises, you're not just ready for an interview, you're ready for a partnership. If you have ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or erased at work, tell me your story in the comments below. Let's build a community that understands that our value isn't determined by those who sign our paychecks, but by the work we do and the integrity with which we do it. Your voice and your story matter. It helps all of us to know we are not alone. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you even a spark of the resolve you need to reclaim your own narrative, please do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for listening.